Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast that simplifies the marketing and the mindset necessary so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. Now imagine that you had to start a practice from scratch in a brand new community where nobody knew you at all. But here's the caveat, you've only got $20,000, that's it, and you don't have access to any more money. You can't get a loan, you can't borrow it off family. What would you do? Where would you invest that 20K? How would you attract new patients? And when would you employ your first team member? Now, these are the exact questions that I asked to Dr. Stephen Franson, the systems guy, the guy from the remarkable practice. And in today's episode, to say that he knocked it out of the park would be an absolute understatement. But to be honest, there were a few of Stephen's answers that really surprised me, particularly when he talked about when he would employ his first staff member. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Now, today's episode is absolutely jam-packed with practical and tactical and ready to implement strategies for both the new practitioner, because maybe you're in this situation, and for those of you that are a little bit more established in practice also. Stephen shares some business and decision-making frameworks that have the ability to not only accelerate your growth, but they also will be powerful in skyrocketing your income too. Now, I really hope that you enjoy this episode because I loved chatting with Stephen. He's one of the brightest minds going around inside of our profession. And this is going to be a part of what I'm going to refer the new practice series. I'm going to be asking these questions and questions very similar to them to many of the brightest minds in chiropractic. Anyway, enjoy the show. Thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives. Let's go talk with Stephen. Stephen Franson, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, my friend?
Oh man, I'm gonna borrow a phrase that you heard around Life University from Dr. Sid. Near perfect.
Near perfect. It's a good one.
I always loved that spirit, man. Near perfect.
Yeah, I love it. It's what a wonderful man Sid Williams was from there too. Are you a life grad? Is that where you came from?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I used to watch Dr. Sid just prowling around that campus, and he was there all the time, and we had mandatory assembly with Dr. Sid every Wednesday. And it was amazing to watch the arc of my appreciation for him. As initially he was this crazy guy with that white hair running around campus, and by the end, man, I just began to just barely appreciate who he was and what a giant he was in chiropractic. So man, I love to honor him with that near perfect.
Was he president of the school at that time, or he was just kind of around?
Yeah, he was right at that transition, right when he was making his transition out. But he was very much involved in the school.
There'll be a lot of our younger listeners here that'll have no idea who Sid Williams is. Could you share perhaps just one of your favorite Sid Williams stories as well? Perhaps give a moment of who he was as a human being.
Most of them I can't really share here because he was quite a colorful character. But I will say this is that he absolutely loved chiropractic, he loved Life University, he loved all of the students, and he was literally around the campus all the time. And those stories that you would hear of him, Sid's famous for dropping the keys. And it was every single seminar, every speaking opportunity he had, he'd always be in front of the audience, usually students, but it didn't matter who it was because he was going to take those keys out and he was going to drop them. And he was essentially teaching you universal laws and how the body really works and how the body really heals from above down, inside out, and how chiropractic works, whether you believe it or not. And he'd pull out those keys and he would drop it and be like, just like gravity, it's gonna, whether you believe it or not, it's gonna happen. He'd drop the keys. And it was just so awesome. And as I'm saying this, it reminded me of just a couple months back, I was giving my son Samuel, who's 18, a tour of the campus, and I got to show him a few highlights of campus as we walked around. He says he wants to become a chiropractor, so of course he wants to go to Life University. So I got to show him the spot where I met his mom, Dr. Camilla Franson, my wife, who we've been together 30 years now since we met on campus. And I also sat in the bleachers with him, and I told him that story of Dr. Sid dropping his keys. I was sitting right up in the bleachers where we used to sit and look down at this crazy guy with the big white hair, who now I just realized was just a revolutionary.
We a lot of those type of characters, whether they be Sid, Jim Sigafus, Reggie, there's been a real passing of a lot of that wisdom, that energy, that life force that's not with us anymore as well. It's exciting to see what's coming next. in the form that it's taking, of which you're very much one of those people as well, that are really kind of have the baton, so to speak. For our listeners, perhaps, that don't know about you, I've got some really great things to talk about today. But before we get into that, perhaps a little bit of background and context. I know you've been on the podcast before, but it's been a long time, too long as well.
Wait a minute, my friend.
Yeah, let's catch them up. And then we've got a fun discussion ahead of us.
So that's great. And it's a privilege to be here. It's great to see you, my friend. I think the last time I saw you was walking out of Cal Jam. Wasn't it just a couple of years back? That's the last time I saw you physically.
Yes.
When we were together at Cal Jam. I was just coming off the stage and you grabbed my arm and we walked out together, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back 12 years before that, where I first met you in Melbourne.
Yes.
And just so miss being over Australia. I look forward to everything opening up, and where it is, it's all opening up. I can't wait to get back over there to just spend time with all of you guys.
Yeah, you've got a lot of friends over here, Steve. Your reputation is so strong and beautiful here. And again, that's a reflection of your character as well.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. So my backstory, a thumbnail sketch is I am a chiropractor. Graduated from Life University. I think it's like 25 years ago, and which is where I met my wife, the awesome Dr. Franson, who, as I mentioned, we met on campus. We actually been together since the first quarter party. And she and I opened up the original remarkable practice in Boston, Massachusetts, which is where I'm from. She's from Sweden. She came over from Sweden as an exchange student to study, become a chiropractor. So I scooped her up right away. Man, we had at it in Boston. We were just blessed. We had such an extraordinary practice for like 22 years. We had fantastic results and outcomes, and just grew this remarkable practice. And it was credited to the commitment to the principle. So we always led with the chiropractic principle. We were very serious clinicians, committed to better health outcomes for our patients. Committed to patient education, very consistent and thorough patient education. We gave people back hope, but we also gave them back personal responsibility for their health. We really wanted to change the health trajectory of families in our community. So that's exactly we got to work doing that. And we had systematized everything. That's I'm known as the systems guy. So we created this practice that really scaled quite extraordinarily. We built world-class teams. It's my favorite part of owning a business and running a practice, is creating world-class teams. A big part of that was our associate program. I had 39 associates over about a 17-year period. And that's where I really fell in love with training and developing chiropractors and teaching them these systems so that they could really reproduce what we were doing. I had all those associates, not because I'm a terrible boss and people quit and left and I had to replace them, but it was like a 2-year apprenticeship. We teach them up there, all of our systems on attraction, conversion, retention, team building, and then we would launch them out into the field. So after 2 years, so it was extraordinary. I fell in love with it at that point and recognized after we had what I would say maxed out what we could do in the chiropractic space as far as a brick and mortar building. I had two choices: start planting multiple practices or coach and really infinitely scale. My wife would not allow me to open multiple practices because I'm a perfectionist control freak, and that wouldn't have been healthy. And she was absolutely right. So I started to coach, and now we have the remarkable practice. So we have the privilege of coaching chiropractors, thousands of chiropractors all around the world. About 25% of our doctors are actually in Australasia. We're really happy about that. We love that. We've got an awesome boots on the ground team there, we've been blessed, man. It's been an awesome road and an awesome journey, and I feel like we're just beginning. We're making a great impact, and I'm just so bullish on the future of chiropractic.
It's been nice to watch it grow from when the remarkable practice kind of started and seeing the scale of it there too. You kind of reminded me too, one of the things that I was very fascinated about as I first met you was your focus and commitment as a clinician on the clinical side of chiropractic, not just the communication side of chiropractic as well. Because for some reason or another, there's often two kind of camps that kind of show up in chiropractic. You're either kind of one of those, let's focus on the report of findings, the new patient, the education side of things, or you end up being a real kind of nerd on the kind of clinical side of things. And often they don't cross together as well. Why do you think that is?
I think that your practice success is almost always a reflection of your certainty.
Mm.
And in my study of chiropractors, I study success, specifically successful chiropractors. And I've identified there's really like four primary sources of certainty. As you said, there's clinical certainty, there's philosophical certainty, there's communications certainty, which is what I think you were alluding to, and then there's the business acumen certainty, right? So for me personally, it was clinical certainty. That was where I think we all have a mixture of all four, but you'll have a dominant leg, if you will. So for me, it was always about clinical certainty. And those, of course, pour over into the other things, right? So like if you have great clinical certainty and it's like, I love problem cases. I love tough cases. Bring me your spine, nervous system, and let's have at it, right? So that's where my certainty pours over into my communication certainty, because it comes across in my language and in my ability to tell the story, right? So, obviously my clinical certainty's foundation is my philosophical certainty. And then I happen to have a good business mind. This chiropractic was not my first business. My practice wasn't my first business. I am by nature, heavily entrepreneurial. So I had a nice complement of business acumen, which is what I think probably most people think that's my source of certainty, but really it's the clinical side of things. So, I appreciate you pointing that out.
So I'm starting, and you're first on my list to want to have these conversations with, a series that I'm putting together on the podcast at the moment that I'm going to call the New Practice series, where I'm interested to ask people who've done great things, if they had to start again, what it might look like. Now, Camilla, this is just, we're making this up. I'm not going to make Steve actually start another practice again, but I want to put some pretty significant constraints on you and throw a few different circumstances at how you would go about it, okay? The first thing I'd like you to think about is, if you had to start again in a town where nobody knew you as well, and you couldn't bring any of your previous reputation, you've got all your skills that you have at the moment, but you don't have your bank account. So you've got 20 grand to start a practice from scratch as well. How do you go about it? What are the first things you think about with regards to finding a place? Do you start with staff? Do you run it by yourself? Where do you begin when you're in a new town and you've got 20 grand in your pocket, or access to 20 grand from a loan?
This is such a great question. So, in the Remarkable Practice, we created a construct to sort of organize the conversation I felt everybody was trying to have, right? So, and the long and short of it is there's 4 seasons to the chiropractic career. There's launch, build, scale, and exit, right? So launch is what you're describing right now, which is that first year out.
Yes.
Okay, so, what we recognize is that when we show up to any environment like you're describing, you have 4 limited resources, right? So time, energy, focus, and money.
Yes.
And as the owner of a business, you are the head cook and bottle washer, right? So you are the de facto CEO, right? So if you're just starting a business, you're in charge, you're the boss, right? So, as the CEO, so to speak, your job description is to collect and to direct the 4 limited resources of your organization. So your job is to marshal the 4 limited resources of the organization and make sure that you can leverage them and get the greatest return, right? So when the constraints that you're giving us here is, we ain't got nothing but time, right? So there's no money there, right? So what you have to start to leverage is your time, energy, and focus if you have incredibly limited financial resources, right? So the big idea here is you've got to overcome what we call the money gap.
Yes.
Right. So the money gap is an eddy that so many chiropractors get stuck in because, for example, and I'll be specific with this, I don't have the money that I need to do the marketing that I need to do to generate the new patients, which bring the new revenue. So I don't have new money. So I don't do marketing. So I don't get any patients. So I don't have revenue. So I don't do marketing. And that's that vicious cycle that they get locked into, Angus, right? So, the reality is you've got to know how to break that cycle, right? And create some velocity to launch you into that, the growth cycle and a virtuous cycle of the practice, right? So long and short of it is chiropractic marketing is patient education, right? So in many forms, whatever platform you're choosing to leverage, right? So ultimately what it comes down to is we have a message and we have to share that message, right? So there's lots of ways to share the message, and that's what marketing is. Marketing is going into the marketplace and generating leads into your practice by sharing a message that resonates with somebody who is seeking a solution to a problem, right? So that's what marketing is, right? So ultimately, to get to revenue, you need to bring revenue into the practice. So we're having a marketing conversation, right? So in order to generate more revenues, you've got to bring in new patients so that you can convert them, care for them, and deliver value, and money follows value. So that's how you're going to build capital in the business. So it has to start as a marketing conversation. Now, patient education can be free, right? No cost or low cost. At the end of the day, in the beginning of our practice, we had no money. We had nothing but debt between the two of us, right? No silver spoon here. And I recognized that straight away. And what I recognized was also I had lots of time, lots of energy, and lots of focus that I could spend.
Yes.
So I just made sure that everyone that I came encounter with, in other words, I would proactively put myself in my community, and everyone was going to know who I was, what I did, and why I did it. And at the end of the day, that is the power of networking. Like, you have to get out and you've got to be able to tell the story. Mm-hmm. I'm an extroverted person. I have no problem walking up and talking to people. So that didn't cost me anything other than my intention. I had to show up with that intention and generate those first new patients into the practice, right? So that's exactly what I would do now if I had the constraints of no money. I would get out into my community, and every person that I interacted with, I would have a construct. They're going to know who I am, what I do, and why I do it. There's going to be a high percentage of those people that you're going to resonate with them. That story that, they are like everybody else. They're wandering around this confused marketplace in healthcare. They're wandering around the wilderness, and they're looking for a better way to better health. If you can position yourself as having a solution, you're going to attract them into your practice. Once they're in your practice, then the conversion process starts. And then, of course, as you take them through your conversion process, part of patient education is going to generate the social capital where they will share it with their loved ones. And that, of course, turns into referrals, right? So at the end of the day, Angus, the promotion of chiropractic is an act of kindness. And if you are an on-purpose chiropractor, you have a moral obligation to share the message, and that doesn't cost you anything. So I'd start there.
So I want to dive a little deeper, because there'll be some listeners that go, I get that. But let's go for a real life scenario. How do you share that? I mean, are you Reggie Gold walking around with a spine in your hand? Are you knocking on doors, like David Singer did before opening his practice? What kind of conversations are you having, and how do they begin? I think most chiropractors, once the conversation starts, they're pretty good at it, but it's bringing the conversation up is where the difficulty is. So tactically, what would that look like?
So my wife and I would gamify this. We created a game, and the game was who could get a person to ask us what we do for a living first. Okay. So whether we were at a restaurant or at the dry cleaner or at the grocery store, it was like, we're going to be interacting with people regularly. I mean, people just need to pick their heads up and look around and just recognize you on average have a conversation with 47 people every single day. It's like, what percentage of those people do you actually know, have a relationship with, could create a relationship with, strike up a conversation with? And what percentage of those people have a spine and nervous system? The easy answer is 100%, right? So,
yes.
This is just a muscle you have to develop. But we would, I don't care whatever scenario we're in, Angus, I'm 3 sentences away from talking about chiropractic. I have no problem about that at all. We're in line at the grocery store, and, I get hit from behind by some, frenetic mom with her 2 kids in the car, and she's, oh, I'm so sorry, sorry. The kids are out there. I'm like, I'll turn and I'll be like, oh, no problem. We work with children all day long in our clinic, so I'm so used to it, I feel right at home. And I'll turn right around and she'll go, really? What kind of clinic do you have? And I'll smile at my wife and wink, and I'll turn around and be like, who's your chiropractor? Right? So this is my wife. She specializes in pediatric chiropractic. I mean, guys, we are 3 sentences away from meeting somebody and meeting their need. So when you change your perspective from selling chiropractic care, stop selling, start solving. You're surrounded by people who are struggling, and they are desperate for a better way to better health for them and their family.
Yeah, I had an aha moment. Sadly, this took me way too long to realize, but I might have been 10 plus years in practice at this stage, because invariably, whether I'm out picking up dinner for us or, that conversation comes up a little bit around what do you do? So when it gets to that stage and I say that I'm a chiropractor, I always used to cringe when people would kind of grab their back and neck and go, oh man, I need my back cracked, or this kind of stuff there too. Because my mind would go, that's not kind of what I do. And I pivoted and I started to ask a couple of different questions. I'd go, oh, really, tell me more. So that next question there of really tell me more, and they go, yeah, I've had this kind of neck problem for a while, or I've had this health challenge going on for a while. And then there was one more question I would ask at the end. Would you like a hand with that? Those two questions meant that I would then start getting new patients everywhere. As you talked about, there was no, I would get it from the guy who owned the tie shop. I would get it from somebody down, wherever. Instead of kind of reeling away when somebody mentioned something about chiropractic that didn't match my paradigm, I would just explore with, tell me more, and would you like a hand? And so those things, then I started to see this world that Patrick Gentempo would talk about of, the world needs me more than I need them. There are new patients literally everywhere. Of that,
they have us surrounded.
Totally.
Yeah.
To dive down a little deeper into that 20 grand that you have, how much of that do you spend on plant? Like, what are you investing into? What size are you going, I'm going to just start off with a tiny little office here. I've got to buy a couple of adjusting tables outside of that, or an adjusting table. Where does that 20 grand get spent?
So you're asking the right guy. So, I'm a strategist, I'm a planner, and 20 grand is an extremely small amount of money, right? So it's almost like you have enough rope to hang yourself there, right? So,
yes.
If somebody came to me, I only have 20 grand to start a practice, I would say, okay, let's get you an awesome associate position and let's save up 50 grand or another 75 grand or what have you. So that would, as a coach, I would tell you that, like, you don't have enough, you're going to be undercapitalized and you're going to be underwater. So I just, professionally, I have to say that, right? And there's certainly ways to raise capital.
Yes.
And there's a triple benefit of being somebody's associate doctor and earning money and saving it. But you're giving me these constraints and I'm playing along. So,
Thank you.
Always having that vision story of now, next, and ultimate, right? So you have to have a clear plan for, where are you right now? Where are you going to be ultimately, which is 3 years from now? And what's the business you're going to build in the next 12 months? And if you have that clear plan, then you're making your data-driven decisions and not just emotional reactions to everything going on. So the first thing I've got to do is I've got to put myself in a place where I can actually add value and capture value. In other words, I've got to be able to deliver services and get paid to do it. So with 20 grand, you're barely going to have enough to put yourself in that position, right? So immediately, as soon as possible, I'm going to be investing in two things: marketing and team building, right? So ultimately, with both of these scenarios, marketing and team building are critical. And my philosophy around these are spend the money you're going to lose. Right. So if you're not spending money on marketing, you are losing money. Okay. So there's anybody's business 101. No one's going to argue with me on that. It's like you have to do it intelligently, strategically, and have good reporting systems. But you have to spend money on marketing, or you're just simply losing money. So I always say, spend the money you're going to lose. Same thing with team. Okay. So most people pump the brakes too much on this one. And I think most businesses are grossly undermanned. They don't have enough manpower to do their best work. And they're stepping on dollars to pick up nickels. When your business is understaffed and you're running a quote unquote lean business, you're overwhelmed, your team's overwhelmed, and that creates an enormous back pressure to any level of growth in the practice. So I want to have a clear line of sight as quickly as possible to my first hire, even if I have to borrow money to be able to make that first hire, because it's just going to put me in a better leveraged position where I'm going to be able to add more value, deliver more value, and capture more value. In other words, make more money faster. So one of the first things I want to do is get that great team member in place. Now, here's an interesting concept, Angus, that your listeners may appreciate. You'll find yourself in one of these two camps. The owner-operator mindset is very typically, when I get to this level, I can afford to bring in this person. And then when I get to this level, then I can bring in this person. And then when I get to this level, then I can bring in this person, right? Sound familiar?
Very.
The CEO recognizes that I have a goal to get to this level. I'm going to need to invest and bring in this person, and I need to bring in their time, energy, focus, and talent to get to that level. And then to get to this next level, I'm going to need to invest and bring this person in and leverage their time, energy, focus, and talent to get to that next level. So you flip the script on that. You actually have to make the investment bring in the horsepower to get to that next level. So I would very quickly get upside down to bring in a team member that would free me up so that I could do the things I'm uniquely qualified to do and drive great value and capture great value.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. I want to fast forward now. The practice is up and humming. Everything's going great. We're 3 years down the track. The constraint I want to pop on you now, when you finished up in practice, the practice that you had, what was the adjustment fee? I know that you used to sell kind of care plans per se, but if we looked at the end dollar fee per adjustment, what was that?
So we're going back, let's call it going back 8 years.
Yeah.
Collection visit average is a number that we would go by. So collection visit average of $40.
Okay.
So what that means is with your plan, your rate might be $50 for an adjustment, but with your plans, if you have care plans, for example, like a 4-month care plan with some level of discount, if they do payments, like a 4-payment plan, what have you, that should average out somewhere around 40.
Yeah.
But let me put an asterisk on that. Today, that number should be somewhere between 50 and 60, and I'm talking US dollars.
Great.
And the caveat here is that there's 2 numbers that are related to each other that are critically important, right? So one number is a fact, 2 numbers are a story. So you can't just ask the question, what would that number be on its own? Collection visit average is a meaningful number, but it doesn't tell the story. The second story would be PVA, which is patient visit average, right? So ultimately, what is your vision of success for a practice? In other words, what is the practice that you're trying to create? For Franson Family Chiropractic, our practice, our vision was we wanted to have a place where families could come and find a better way to better health, right? In other words, lifetime family wellness care. So lifetime, it implies that over the course of a lifetime, they'd have regular chiropractic care. Family, meaning multiple generations. Chiropractic wellness care, which implies that they're not just simply coming in when they're in crisis, right? So that's a descriptor of a vision story. Now, your business model, your financial model has to match your vision story, and your financial model will dictate the culture of the business. So you can't have a financial model that competes with your vision for your story. It has to be one that creates the vision. So in context of that vision story, I set my prices at a place where we were purposeful and it was possible. In other words, the motivated person would actually make it happen, and we were profitable, right? So those are the sort of 3 constraints around that.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge your possible, and I'm going to challenge to push the ends or the edges of that competing with that vision. So we said in today's, it's $50 to $60 is what the visit average would be there. I want to double that. So we're now looking that, you have to have that show up somewhere between $100 and $110.
Yes.
What do you do to be able to try and pull that off? Okay, that's the constraint I'm putting on you. At the end of the day, I want to keep this idea of family wellness, chiropractic care. So exactly as you talked about before, multiple generations, regular care. And yet the thing that's got to change is instead of that being a $50 or $60 average there too, we're going to double that. How do you pull that off?
Well, you're supposing that I'm going to tell you that you can pull it off, right? So here's my argument against that model. You make good money. I make good money. All right. So do the math, depending on what your clinical recommendations are. If you're a family of 4 that comes into a practice, right, you're seen is typical 3 times a week for the first month. Is that typical? So now we have 4 people getting adjusted 3 times a week. So that's 12 visits a week at, let's call it $100 collection visit average for just our mental health here. So now we're at $1,200 a week, right, for a family's care, which is $4,800 a month. We do that for the first, 4 months of care. You're talking about an extraordinary sum of money, which, of course, you and I know that chiropractic care is priceless. The question is that something that is possible for the number of patients that you would like to see in your practice? That's not saying that you couldn't do that. It's just the question is how many patients would you like to see per week in your practice? So ultimately, could you take care of a given number of patients who are in the position where they would make $100 visit average happen for them and for their family? Absolutely. Is that sustainable? Is that scalable? And is that durable? Those are my points. I'd have to argue that.
So here's what
and it's not just an idea. Know that I have metrics on thousands of practices, right? So if you want me to tell you regionally, what do we see in Australia by region? If you want me to tell you what we see globally, I can give you that data. So I know the relationship between collection visit average and patient visit average. So those two things compete with one another, almost like a seesaw. Collection visit average goes down, PVA goes up. Collection visit average goes up, PVA goes down without exception.
So here's what I would throw back at you in terms of returning serve. The average car price out there, and I'm making this up, but let's just say it's 15 grand. Okay. In fact, let's say average new car price might be 20 grand. Okay. And yet Ferrari has a waiting list. I can't walk into my Ferrari dealer here in Australia and get a car. Like I cannot. And yet I'm probably looking at 350, 400 Aussie grand to get a car. And they're going to tell me it's 2 years before I can have one. And they have a cracking business. Bentley is the same. They're two. I can walk into Chanel and there's a line of clothes in there. Right now here in Australia, if I want to go and buy a Rolex, I can't get one from the shop. I have to get one from the grey market. So I can, if I want to, head into Apple and I can buy an Apple Watch immediately. There are top-end markets there that it's working. And there are families in those situations that are buying Bentleys, that are buying Ferraris, that are buying Rolexes. And I'm not saying like, if you were to play the game with me, what would we have to do to show up as Ferrari or Bentley, just in this thought experiment? How could that look? And what changes if you were forced in that scenario? Go, I got to see if I can make this work. What could somebody do if they were willing to it to show up as Ferrari or Bentley or Rolex?
So it's a different question. And do I think it's possible? Absolutely. We have clients whose collection visit averages are 200.
Yes.
No question about it. I have clients who specialize in professional athletes and they charge $5,000 for 1 day's work because they have to close their office and take care of this athlete. So there's celebrity chiropractors who pull that off every day. And I'll tell you, frankly, they're not doing anything different than we are. Right. So ultimately, they've branded themselves that way very smartly.
Yes.
They deliver a level of service that's an expected level of service for that level of a consumer. And they just simply have made the decision that, you know what, I'm going to be the premium priced chiropractic practice. And I do recognize that this is not going to be possible for the vast majority of people in my community. And I'm okay with that. I'm going to be I'm going to be attracting a very specific percentage of people in our community, just like Bentley and Ferrari. They're not trying to be everyone's car, right? So Rolex isn't everybody's watch. This is the essence of a premium brand. Like, so there's always a very limited number of those things that are available, and it's their exclusivity that drives the value, and some really good marketing.
Yes.
And you know what? Quality is, of course, table stakes. And I love the spirit of that, because when the right-hand side of the bell curve moves, it pulls everybody to the right. So I love the spirit of, this thought exercise, because it forces everybody to say, geez, what would I have to do in my practice to charge $100 collection visit average? And what would change? What would the repercussions be? It's a very healthy stretch for everyone. Again, I just want to go back to my premise is your pricing structure has to be a reflection of your vision story, right? What does success look like to you in your practice? And then reverse engineer that. So you're in alignment. And, ultimately that's what you're describing is success, right? So where does success live? Success lives when there's alignment between your core values, your vision story, and your behavior. So if you have your core values and your vision story of success, and it sounds like I want to be the premier, premium, top shelf chiropractic practice in my community that has a $100 collection visit average, then your behaviors need to be in line with that. And that's where sustainable success will live.
The reason why I think it's a valuable thought experiment, we started off this conversation talking about a level of certainty. I think for most chiropractors, the idea, because if we have, and we played that thought experiment out to say, well, what if I started offering a Ferrari at a Toyota price? And I actually ultimately think that's what we should be doing, incredibly over delivering for what we could, but that forcing ourselves to say, well, what could I do? Because there is very clearly a difference of what the showroom of Ferrari looks like compared to the showroom of Toyota. Now, I don't think the showroom of Ferrari costs 5 times the amount other than the cars inside of it. There's a different decor inside of Versace than there is inside of Target. Again, I don't think it's 5 times the cost to set the decor up like that as well. I think that if we can set ourselves up as delivering premium service that then matches the demographic that we want to serve there too, I think it can only help to increase the impact, the income, the enjoyment, the conversions, all those kind of things from there also. But it is interesting because there are avenues, as you talked about, in terms of just branding. Am I going to make that decision that I am the premium chiropractor as well? Thanks for playing along with me, buddy.
And we need that whole spectrum, right? Just much like you're talking about cars or restaurants or what have you. There's always a spectrum that's available, right? So if you want a watch, you can get a watch. So you should be able to have access to watches, right? So, and, if you want a Rolex, get a Rolex.
Yes.
but you've got to be able to make the investment to, and there's plenty of other things that you could be spending that money on, right? But because you've placed value on having that particular brand of a watch, you'll make that investment based on your value. So Rolex has established itself as just not another watch. It's actually worth this much money to buy this Rolex, right? And again, that is a storyline that's backed up by a deliverable, right? If the deliverable wasn't there, it wouldn't be sustainable, right? So you can't just be a good marketer. So often you see these fly-by-night, high-priced items or brands, they just don't last because they don't have the quality deliverable. If you can match a great story with a great delivery, the sky's the limit, Angus. And I really believe that you can do almost anything that you want. But in business, there's always a trade-off.
Yes.
Right? And it's naive to go into any environment and not recognize there's always a trade-off, right? So I love the expression, pick your problems. So when you're going into any environment, you're designing any business or whatever, instead of saying, oh, think of all the opportunities and they think of all the positives and all the great things you're going to get, a better and more mature perspective is to say, pick your problems, because each of these scenarios that we're outlining is going to come with its own unique set of problems.
Yes.
So what you want to do is like, how do you want to spend your time? Which problems do you want to be solving?
Yeah, I think I've been studying branding a lot recently and fascinated inside of that. That we'll talk about kind of there being 3 distinct pillars, with one being kind of luxury and premium, which we've talked about there too. The second being convenience, and the third being budget. One of the mistakes I see chiropractors making is they're choosing a little bit from each 3 of those pillars there as well. And it leads to problems. And then also inside of that too, is that we can be very judgmental in around those. I mean, there are billion-dollar brands inside of luxury, convenience, and budget. To some extent, Amazon is building itself as a budget brand there too, arguably producing one of the most wealthy individuals in the world there too. And so we will sometimes scoff at chiropractors that are going for budget pricing. Now, provided that you have your office set up correctly, your staffing, your overheads, the volume of people that you can see, it can be an incredibly profitable business model if it is that way. And same with convenience and luxury from there as well. Buddy, thank you for being such a great sport and playing along with these today. It's nice to try and stretch into some of the outer ranges and the depth that you have on this stuff. It just, I've got 2 pages of notes that I've scribbled down through here as well. It's very hard, if not impossible, to go to an area there, Stephen, that you haven't put some, great deal of thought into as well. So thank you for all that you do there as well.
I love the conversation, man. I love what you're doing. And, I love chiropractic and I love the business of chiropractic. We're in the business of saving lives. And when business is good, everybody wins. You hear me say that all the time. It's like, when people start looking at it that way, it's just like, this is a business. And when you start making that business and you turn it into almost like your sport, you develop this passion and energy around it. It's like, all you want to do is optimize.
Yes.
So I appreciate the opportunity, man.
Well, this is what I'm saying to my coaching client. I'm like, we're not selling widgets, gang. We're selling the coolest thing in the world. Like, this is amazing, and we're playing a game of, just see yourself as you touched on this beforehand. I think one of the identities that would serve people well is to take on the identity of as a problem solver. It's what I am across all areas. And we have patients come to us and they're in front of us and we're problem solvers. We have staff, we're a problem solver. Marketing is a problem solving exercise. We've got an outcome that we want to achieve, and how do we get ourselves out there and solve more problems? In fact, I think to some extent that I get paid in direct proportion to the number and the size of the problems I solve. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how can I solve more and bigger problems.
So, I mean, the purpose of a business, Angus, is to solve a problem for another person.
Yes.
Like if we have a purpose-driven conversation as business people, it's like, you got to remember the purpose of a business is to add value to another by solving a problem that they know they have and they're willing to pay to get it solved. That's the purpose of a business. And if chiropractors would listen to that, and you recognize that you are a business, right? And the purpose of a business is to solve a problem for another, right? To add value by solving a problem for another person, and money follows value. So it makes you ask a different question. It's like, what problems do I like solving? Like, in other words, what type of patients do I like working with? If the purpose of my business is to solve problems for people, what problems do I like solving? And that's a great thought exercise, because it helps you develop your brand and your brand messaging and your brand promise. And next thing you know, you're actually resonating with the community who's actively looking for a solution. So you've got these people who are surrounding you. They have you surrounded constantly. 20% of your community right now is looking for a solution to health issues, right? So if you think to yourself, how do I resonate with those people? How can I be relevant to those people? You have to recognize they're looking to solve a problem, right? And you need to be able to speak into their listening, right? Your brand messaging has to say, are you facing these challenges? I'm not going to try to script it for people because I don't want to immediately get pigeonholed into, oh, you're a symptom chaser, whatever it is, right? So, unfortunately at this point, there's no one in our community Googling subluxation correction or optimal spine and nervous system or optimal, expression of our innate potential. Sorry, Dr. Sid, but we're just not there yet. So you'd be irrelevant if that was the only messaging you're putting into your community. So instead, think about what problems are they looking for? And to your point, once you do make that connection and they say, oh, well, maybe you're an expert that can help me, then you can start the conversation that starts with, tell me more about that, right? So, and then you take them through a series of questions, you make a Socratic empathetic connection with them. And next thing you know, they're like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. Then they're saying, tell me more.
Yeah, gold. Speaking about tell me more about how our listeners can be with you more, learn more. I know you've written a great book recently as well. Tell us a little bit about that and how do they continue this conversation with you?
Awesome. Thank you for that. So I know this is a podcast. We listen to this is a podcast listening audience. So you can check us out. We have a podcast, the Remarkable CEO podcast. So Dr. Pete Camiolo and I, so the Remarkable CEO podcast, it's awesome. If you are that doctor who's looking to make the shift from owner operator to CEO and turn your practice job into a business, where that's the podcast for you. If you'd like to pick up a copy of my book, it's The Remarkable Practice. It's a book I wrote for my son, Sam, who says he wants to become a chiropractor. So this is the definitive guide to creating the remarkable practice. And we're actually going to give a copy of that away. So there's a link here. Angus, I don't know, put it in the show notes, what have you.
Yes.
Happy to give away a copy of the ebook. And then also on Facebook, you can find us at The Remarkable Practice. We have a free private group. The coaches are in there all the time. We have lots of great content in there and thousands of our remarkables who are smart, on purpose, like-minded chiros who are very generous, sharing their thoughts, inspiration, and challenges. So you can chime in and help other people. So we love that.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to encourage all our listeners to follow that up. Steve's the real deal. There's no other way of putting it there as well. The other thing that, I have admired you since the beginning is that your front of house is the same as your back of house. And that's not always the way for many of the leaders in any field. Chiropractic is no different with regards to that also. So, buddy, thank you for everything that you do and that you continue to do as well. Thank you for always sharing so generously with me as well. I look forward to when we talk again next, buddy. Take care.
Thanks, Angus. Great to see you, buddy.
Thank you.
God bless everyone.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer Program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.